Good morning. One of the most interesting stories, of course, is still Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, who's been impeached, and he's being charged with an awful lot of things that a lot of people seem pretty clear he did. Now, he has a local attorney, of course, and that attorney did something very interesting a couple of days ago after having an announcement that he was going to be Ken Paxton's attorney. He said, first of all, in an Instagram, he said, I'm confident that Ken Paxton is going to be defended and is going to prevail in this. He's all going to be cleared on this. He took that down a few minutes later. I think that's kind of funny. Now, we've got an expert in this whole situation to talk with us this morning. Fascinating guy. Vlad, am I pronouncing your last name properly? Because I didn't ask you about that earlier. You're on the air, my friend.
Yeah.
Good. Is that close enough?
No, yeah.
Okay, good. Vlad, you mentioned, and I thought this was really true in talking with you yesterday, you're always listening, thinking, working. You are a nationally recognized writer, political analyst, commentator. And one of the things I find fascinating is that a lot of politicians, political parties, and PACs ask you to come in and make some comments and help them, give them some guidance. Yes?
Fleshing out that messaging is really key to driving their goals forward.
So can you be with us for about? We got a little problem with the sound. Are we all picking that up? Let me unplug things here for a minute, see if we can cut down background noise and get a little clearer. You might want to try talking a little more into the bottom of the phone, whatever. But one of the reasons we ask you on this morning, you are very, very plugged into what's happening in the Republican Party, watching it closely in the Texas Republican Party. And, of course, there's now some turmoil. I don't think anybody had it in the back of their head that at this exact point, as they were starting into the build-up for the elections, all of a sudden, full warfare between the governor, the attorney general, the Texas legislature. Well, you take it from there. What's going on? What's happening in Texas politics?
Well, look, I mean, clearly, Republicans had some big goals going into this legislative session, certainly around property tax, education, the border, and what's happening is clearly the Senate and the House are miles apart, and the difference in leadership there, the difference in approach, is clear as day. You certainly have the lieutenant governor definitely opposed to the direction that the Speaker of the Texas House has gone. A lot of that is driven primarily by the margins there that are in each of those chambers. Senators are working very closely with Governor Patrick, and they collaborate very much in line with what the priorities that
that was funny. I think there may have been a Freudian slip. You said Governor Patrick. I think you meant Lieutenant Governor Patrick.
When we refer to
maybe Governor to be, it depends on whether or not our governor makes some missteps.
Lieutenant Governor Patrick outlined 30 priorities before the start of the legislative session, and the Senate has passed all 30 of them. On the other hand, in the House, Speaker Phelan has always said that he wanted the members to run the legislation, and that's exactly what we've got, rather than priorities that are shaped and molded by the Republican Party of Texas or by the members of the Republican Party themselves. We have the state representatives doing it. And so we get very different legislation across the board on border security, on property taxes, on education than we do in the Senate. And so there's a huge disparity there. And Governor Abbott really wants to just get these wins notched and move forward, and it's becoming entrenched and difficult.
Can I ask you a quick question, my friend? One of the things I've been used to spend a lot of time in the Texas House and the Texas Senate covering it, but also just because I was really interested. I'd go in like a lot of people. I'd just sit and listen because it's fascinating. One of the things that's been true a lot of the time is that the House actually tries to work in a civil way with each other. The Democrats, the Republicans, of course, it's always dependent on who the speaker is. But that seems to be, that history seems to be continuing. It seems like the legislature, the House anyway, lets everybody make their political points, but they expect them to then get down to work with each other to try to get some real stuff passed. The Senate, on the other hand, still seems to be kind of lost in politics and what they do, what they actually turn out. Am I right on that? Where would you correct me on that?
I would say really it's there's certainly some elements of that involved where the House encourages members to work collaboratively together. But what we have seen historically is that the House is usually where the fist fights break out,
Yeah.
And usually where we have arguments on the floor and screaming matches on the floor. We don't see that at all in the Senate. What we have seen historically, certainly during the tenure of Lieutenant Governor Patrick in the Senate, is the Senate has been guided by a very strong, steady hand from above, with priorities being mapped out well before the legislature starts its session, and just methodically working through to achieving those priorities. Governor Patrick also has been very focused on making sure that he hands legislative assignments to senators that he can count on to deliver specifically what he mapped out. In contrast, what we see in the House is Speaker Phelan has historically handed out committee chairs and committee assignments to members of the legislature who he thinks would be more advantageous to passing his version of the legislation. And what we've seen is a lot of acrimony and a lot of discord in the House side. Lately, what we've seen is a lot of people coalescing in the House on both sides around pushing legislation that is directly out of line with what is passing in the Senate. So really, the House is trying to assert itself, and the Senate is trying to pass legislation that asserts itself as well. And so they're at loggerheads.
Vlad, who's winning or losing in this situation with Ken Paxton? I mean, who do you think gets hurt, if anybody, by this impeachment and the possibility that maybe he'll be convicted? And maybe I should ask you about that up first. Well, by the way, this is a fascinating conversation. I want to thank you so much for being in with us this morning on KPFT. Hey, what do you think at this point? Which way are the winds blowing for Paxton in the Senate? Do you think he's going to get convicted? What do you believe, just on your own private guess? What do you think is going to happen there?
I think he falls short of conviction. I don't think there's enough votes in the Senate to move to conviction. I think it's going to be difficult for him. I think it's going to be problematic for him, for the Senate, for the party, and I think ultimately it's a bad situation. I think if he does not get convicted, then I think certainly this is probably going to be his last term as Attorney General. I would not be surprised if he does not get convicted, that he decides to step away from the role of Attorney General before his term ends.
Wow, now that would be fascinating, because what I've been curious about is whether we see I don't want to be unfair to the former president at this point, but he's made it pretty clear that if he gets another term, he's going to be all about revenge. And my question, of course, is if Paxton does get acquitted or not convicted, however you want to view that, does he then have free reign to go back and take revenge on all these House of Representative members who did not go with him? Because he was sure not above threatening them in the process leading into that vote that wound up with his impeachment.
I certainly think that all possibilities are open, but Attorney General Paxton would know that an impeachment is not a one-time deal. It's not they didn't use their impeachment card and not have anything left. They can impeach him again if they want to, and that would be debilitating. That would be really difficult for him and for his administration of that office to continue forward. It's already a problem that he is suspended from office and he cannot perform his duties. If he were to be impeached again, it would be difficult. It's not impossible for the Attorney General's office to function with him in its head.
That's the extinction of Ken Paxton, effectively, isn't it? If he gets impeached again, or if this continues for too long, because if he doesn't have any power, he doesn't have much ability to do anything more than make a lot of phone calls and try to set up situations where maybe people who oppose him are going to be primaried next year, that is opposed by an even more conservative. Now, looking at all this and looking at Harris County and looking at the fact that the governor and the state government in general has really been starting to go after Harris County, and then Dallas, of course, and then Austin and San Antonio as these liberal islands in the sea of red. What do you see coming about that? Is that going to continue all the way into the election? Or are we getting? Is there any way that who prevails in this, and what should we watch? What should we see on the horizon coming in that? Living here in Houston.
Look, I think the state is definitely going to prevail on this, simply because what counties like Harris County have as their argument is unsustainable. Certainly, if Harris County had made the changes that they wanted to make and run the elections that they in the way they wanted to run them, and delivered successful elections without any problems, it would be one thing. But we all remember that there were 10,000 votes found a few days after the election ended. We all remember that hundreds of polling locations ran out of ballots during the election. So there's the concerns are not political in nature. The concerns are logistical, functional, and systemic in nature, but they originate from a political perspective. And so I think the state is on very solid, strong ground here. And Harris County, led by Commissioner's Court, is really on shaky ground, and you see that in Commissioner's Court meetings where they're really screaming at each other and cursing each other out during committee meetings. And so I think the state is definitely going to prevail on this because the evidence is just so strong in the state's favor and so strong against the county. And so until the county decides until counties decide to clean up their act, until they decide to, run elections properly rather than politicizing them, which is what has happened in Harris County, we're going to continue to see intervention by the state.
A look ahead, by the way, is that I have every intention of having as a kind of a surprise guest, I think, but I want to have both sides get a chance on this. I'm going to have Mattress Mac on and have a conversation with him about why he filed this suit, because it's not all, it's all not all just optics. As you say, there's some real facts here that he or any reasonable person would have some concern about. Again, I'm a pretty liberal Democrat, so I'm going to look at this and say, oh boy, not good publicity. But it is what it is. The facts are the facts, and we had some problems. Hey, in my own precinct, we had some problems. Didn't have enough ballot paper to print things out. That's a big problem. What else do you see? What else do you see coming up that you want to talk about this morning? What's most interesting as you look about this landscape, this state of Texas? By the way, what role do our senators play, our two Republican senators, in all of this? Do they get involved in the minutia, the grit of all these local political issues? I mean, you would certainly argue that at least one of those senators is a huge, huge supporter not only of the ex-president, but he's a huge supporter of extreme right-wing Republican politics. What effective do those two senators have on what happens in their state?
Well, I think right now both senators are working to play a strong role, and certainly Senator Cruz has worked to support certain candidates or certain elected officials that align most closely with his perspectives and his ideas. I think the senator that's actually playing a larger role right now is Senator Cornyn. And he's been sending some very strong signals that this may very well be his last term in the Senate, and that he's moving things on the ground and saying things and working with people to really position things for potentially strengthening the positioning of a chosen successor or somebody who may be able to move into that role. And so we certainly see Senator Cruz working to move forward on issues with border security, issues with election integrity, issues with protecting children across Texas. But what we're seeing behind the scenes is Senator Cornyn moving and trying to preclude certain people from moving in, or trying to encourage a different kind of perspective going forward. And it seems that he's winding down his Senate career. So they're both working on events, but really from a peripheral basis, and mostly from behind the scenes, or in Senator Cruz's case, really, echoing a lot of the same concerns that members of the Texas Senate and the Texas GOP have.
Okay, let's go to Amanda Johnston for a second. Let's get caught up on the traffic. And I also want to encourage people to get on you. This is a chance to talk to somebody who really knows. They don't just have an opinion. This is a chance to talk about somebody who really knows and ask him some questions. So get some calls coming in right now, 713-526-5738. That's why we have those numbers there for you, 713-526-5738. Remember to hit option 2 as soon as you hear that little hi, this is KPFT, and we'll put you on, let you talk back and forth for a moment with Vlad because he knows what he's talking about. Back again, Vlad, curiosity. Obviously, Ken Paxton has chosen Tony Busby as his lead attorney in defending him in this impeachment or in the conviction phase of this in front of the Senate. And I thought it was fascinating that Busby then deleted his Instagram a few days ago where he strongly came out and say, I'm clear that the Attorney General is going to prevail in this. Oops, maybe I don't want to say that. So what does Ken Paxton have a case here? I mean, is this all going to be about politics? Does he have a case to avoid conviction, or is it all going to be he just doesn't have the votes and it's going to be or at least, the prosecutors don't have the votes, and it's going to be all again about the Republican Party trying to avoid one way or another a huge embarrassment here?
Well, you bring up a really good point, which is, we have a very prominent attorney, Houston-based attorney representing, Ken Paxton, but we have 2 very prominent Houston-based attorneys representing the prosecution.
Yes.
And so, it's not for nothing that, you have Dick DeGuerin and Rusty Harding serving as the lead prosecutors for the House impeachment managers.
We've got 3 attorneys here, all of which are do not take prisoners kind of attorneys. I mean, this is going to be interesting. This is not going to be a boring hearing. I'm sorry, go ahead. Right.
Well, look, Busby has a history of trying a number of high-profile cases. He even defended former Governor Rick Perry against abusive office charges from Travis County that were thrown out by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. And so what we understand is somebody like Tony Busby understands how to defend a very high-profile defendant, how to defend against very strong charges. But, I think it's less to defend and more to convey a sense and a perception of what the issues really are. I think it's sending a signal. I think it's trying to convey a sense of that Ken Paxton takes these charges seriously, that he's going to make a vigorous defense of his case, and that he's moving forward with trying to maintain his hold on that office. What we know is that the nature of the case is purely political, because it's going to be tried in the Senate. It's not being tried for criminal charges or civil charges. And so both sides are going to have to make political arguments.
Now, of course, Paxton really peeved a lot of people. I mean, there are a lot of people in the House who were just personally angry at this guy. This has been a fight they've been spoiling for a long time. Do you have some time to take a couple of questions from our listeners?
Sure.
Look, let's do that. Let's go to Joe. Joe, good morning. You're on UTalk. I'm Steve Hunter. Obviously, we've got Vlad here, and he knows what he's talking about. What, you had a comment to make or some questions? It's all yours, buddy. You're on the air.
Hey, good morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Hey, so to me, the lieutenant governor and the governor having a public tiff seems to be political theater. I mean, when was the last time that they openly have a disagreement, especially something carried on local news? So, and it's over property taxes. And so, to me, they would love to see property taxes go down because it's a win-win for people. And at the same time, that's what funds schools, right? I mean, a lot of the funding for our ISDs come from property taxes. And so if they can get that to go away or reduce it, they could almost make the ISD, the Department of Education, collapse for the state of Texas. And, I mean, right now, Greg Abbott's out running around with his voucher program, charter schools, and I just think it's political theater. I'm sorry, it's not. I don't know. It's not so much about Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton.
Got a particular question for Vlad related to that, or anything else? That's an interesting statement. I think you're right, Joe.
That's it.
Okay, thanks, Joe. 713-526-5738, and then option 2. We're waiting for your voice and your questions. Vlad, that's an interesting question. How does this whole thing about property taxes play out, and what's the implication for that? Because obviously we're not the only place, we're not the only state in which property taxes fund the schools. And it's not the usual way. But if the reliance and the control locally on property taxes, goes away, and it looks again like more and more and more the schools are completely dependent on the state. What happens here? How does this play out?
What we've seen over time is that spending at the school level has increased dramatically in ways that are completely unsustainable. Throughout Texas, we have employers, we have homeowners who are making increasingly tough decisions on how they're going to move forward. Property taxes are rising. People lose their businesses and their homes because they can't afford to pay. If you look at the rate of increase from 1998 to 2017, property taxes have gone up 212%, which is nearly twice an average taxpayer's ability to pay. And so what we're doing is we're taxing people out of their homes. We're taxing people out of their businesses. And it's all in an effort to sustain public schools, which is a valid and honorable approach. But the problem is that the spending is unsustainable, and it's going up at a rate that is completely unjustified given what we've seen as a result. If we were spending more and more on schools, on school districts, and we were seeing better and better results every single year, there'd be a rationale for it. But that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is increasingly we are continuing to spend more and more in property tax every single year on school districts, but we're not seeing that same rate of increase in performance or in success. What we're seeing is school districts like HISD get taken over by the state because there are failing schools all over the city. And so obviously that system is not working. And so curtailing the spending, finding ways to limit it, and find ways to have the school districts find better solutions is the way to go.
Vlad, if I'm going to ask you to grab your crystal ball for a minute, and let's look deep into the future, that money's got to come from somewhere. So where does it come from? Does this look to increases in the state sales tax? Does Texas begin to, here's the third rail? Do we begin to look at a situation where we have an income tax? Where does the money come from now? Because
I don't think an income tax is ever on the table. I think we see increases perhaps in franchise taxes. I think we have stabilized property tax, and it's more in line with limits in property tax increases from school districts. I think if their increases are at a lower pace, I think you have enough money coming in. I think also Texas has the ability right now to take advantage of energy production and innovation in Texas to grow businesses, to bring in those revenues from those sources. I think we're on pace to be one of the fastest growing and strongest growing states in America. We have the ability to take that growth and translate it into success across the board.
Also, if we look internationally, of course, with Saudi Arabia finally saying, okay, we're going to act to raise the prices of oil and energy, at least petroleum-related energy around the world. That means maybe more tax income available for the state of Texas. Okay, we've got a caller, Lester. Lester, good morning. You're on UTalk. You've got Vlad on the phone with you. What's your question? What's your comment, my friend?
Good morning, guys. My comment is about the election, and I really feel like that the trying to take over Harris County elections, it really is strictly political, because when I look at the amount of people that voted, it was a success. Okay, we may have had some hiccups as far as running out of ballots. Maybe some ballots weren't counted in time, but people were actually able to vote. And when you look at some of the laws that the governor was trying to pass, how he was trying to pass to make elections kind of standard over the whole state, that really doesn't make sense when you have a rural small town where everybody can go vote by 6 or 7 o'clock. The town pretty much shuts down. But when you look at Houston and you look at Dallas and you look at Austin, where these metropolitan areas are running 24 hours a day, you have medical centers, you have refineries, you have hospitality. These people cannot go vote on a 9 to 5 basis, and really to me, and I think it's plain to see. I mean, even the drive-through voting, where the elderly people were able to drive through, stay in their car. They didn't have to go stand in a line for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, who doesn't think that's a good thing for voting, especially when we're supposed to be the mecca of democracy across the world, and then we try to pass laws where you can't even give a person a bottle of water that's standing in a line for 2 or 3 hours. So it really is political. It doesn't have anything to do with voting.
Lester,
they didn't like to turn out.
Lester, my friend, you're completely correct, by the way, because everything you said, that should be completely clear to everybody. Yeah, it is completely clear to everybody. If you're a Republican, what you're thinking is, whoa, that's a huge difference in the rural areas in terms of being able to get to vote, and that's our Republican vote. And then, whoa, in these cities where all the Democratic vote is, and can we maybe close it down a little bit so not so many votes get cast? That's a pretty cynical way to put it. But Vlad, what is playing out in reality here? Is it all about politics? I guess so, huh?
Again, this isn't entirely. This is driven by politics, but it's not entirely about politics. It's about what actually happened during the 2022 election. What we know now, after analysis by multiple sources, is that about 15% of polling places had to turn away voters during Election Day. There were 60 precincts that ran out of paper on Election Day.
Yeah, we're talking about Harris County, not statewide. We're talking about Harris County.
Yeah, here in Harris County. Yeah. Voters were disenfranchised. I mean, the simple fact is it happened. It's documented. It's proven. And certainly, it was driven by the decisions made by the Harris County Commissioner's Court, led by County Judge Lena Hidalgo, to take away administration of the elections from the historically elected offices. And in Harris County, it's 2 black women who run those offices, and turn it over to a personally chosen election administrator. And so what we know is that Election Administrator Longoria reported a week after the election that, we just found 10,000 more votes. We know that a lot of places ran out of ballot paper and people were turned away and were not able to vote. Those are real, true facts. And certainly, the vast majority of people got a chance to vote and voted successfully. But what we know is that whenever you have an election in which people are turned away, when people are denied their vote, when the vote of people is disenfranchised, then clearly something's gone wrong.
That's really bad optics, among other things.
To make sure we remedy that going forward, and that's what the Harris County Commissioner's Court is fighting against.
Lester, anything you want to add to that? That was a really good question. Go ahead, my friend.
So now those things are true. So my thing is, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you have certain issues that came up, let's fix those issues. Hey, this is what you guys did wrong. You're going to fix this. What's your plan to fix this? You need to put that back in the hands of the people that normally run this, that wouldn't have these issues. Hey, I agree with that. But my fear is they're going to come with all different type of other things added to that, to block people from block people to actually being able to vote that would have voted normally, and just trying to reduce the amount.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like an accident, does it? Lester, thanks for calling, my friends. Great question. Vlad, back to you. Any comments you want to make in response to that?
Well, look, again, and what the caller is asking, I certainly understand the question and the source of that concern. But what we have seen emerge from the state legislature is exactly the opposite. It's very sharply focused on trying to solve this problem. It's requiring, that the elections administration be returned to elected officials who are elected by residents to administer elections. It's requiring that, making sure that ballots are in place for people to be able to vote. It's requiring that these problems be addressed directly. So it's not just, oh, well, we're going to arbitrarily make these decisions. It's decisions that have been made specifically to address the questions.
By the way, you're being incredibly generous with your time and with your comments. I got a question. One of the things you'd written at one point was that your role models included Ronald Reagan and Winston Churchill. Just to digress for a second, who do you see on the political stage nationally, or for that matter in Texas? Who do you see that lives up to those? Those are two pretty high towers, whether you agree with them politically or not. Ronald Reagan and Winston Churchill. Who do you see lives up to that politically in the U.S. and in Texas?
We have a lot of leaders who are trying and working really hard to try to live up to those role models and those giants. I certainly don't think we have anyone right now who is actually able to reach those heights. And certainly it only comes in retrospect after you look back on someone's life and see that they were able to really lead a life of leadership. But right now, I don't think we have anyone who can reach that kind of stature.
Are you optimistic about the democracy in the United States? I mean, obviously there was a time a few months ago when a lot of people were really distressed on both sides. Where does this lead?
I'm incredibly optimistic about democracy. I think you've seen that in certainly in the United States House of Representatives, where even though it's very a narrow margin on both sides, we've seen some very strong legislation emerge from there, some strong bipartisan legislation. We've seen legislation that has had both sides and both voices, both sides of the argument really speak strongly on and advance legislation that really focuses on providing solutions to people.
Yeah, when you look, as a matter of fact, even at the vote a few days ago in the Senate and in the House on the cap, obviously the spending cap, the funding cap, you saw a lot of surprising names, but responsible Republicans who came across, including Mitch McConnell, some of the most partisan people that exist in terms of politics in the U.S. This was the right thing to do, so they voted that way. They really did. They voted out of their conviction and their commitment to the country, not out of what was going to be maybe politically the most devastating for the opposition at that particular point. And when you actually sit and look at that list of people that voted, it's a long list of people that you've often seen play real rough in the game of politics nationally. But at a moment like this, they decided, let's vote. Let's make things move forward. Let's go to John if we can for a second. John, good morning. You're on KPFT. You're on UTalk. I'm Steve Hunter, and you've got Vlad here. What's your question? What's your comment?
My question is not a question. Good morning. How you doing?
Thank you, my friend. We're doing great.
But the thing that I see about the voting and those Republicans that want to try to run Harris County elections, that was all on them. I heard what the guy said about he thinks that Harris County has a shaky ground to stand on with this here. But I don't really think so, because if you go back and listen to what Paxton said, and this might be why the Republicans is trying to impeach his ass now, impeach him now, is because he said on TV that he would hear over 2 million ballots that could have got out when the sickness came.
The pandemic, yeah.
The pandemic came, and he was proud of that. I think that when it's all said and done, and if it's a fair thing when it goes to court, that what the Republicans came up with, those 2 new rules, they'll be thrown out as unconstitutional, and that's what should happen to them. The guy you're talking to, I don't know how he feel about it, but that's the way I feel about it. And another thing, I heard you say that you're going to have Mattress Mac on.
Yep.
I didn't see anything. I didn't see him saying anything about other people voting before this year, but he spent his money on that lady that was she wasn't very truthful. I'm not going to say but she wasn't very truthful, and she wasn't a good candidate, so she had no business winning in the first place. So that's how I feel about it.
John, the reason I'm going to have Mattress Mac on is, one, I want to hear what he's got to say. He's done a lot of good things forget politics, but he's done a lot of good things in Harris County and Houston. He's clearly somebody that has the public good in some areas in mind. I want to let him have his say, and I'm very clear there are going to be some other people who've got some pushback. That's going to be a really interesting discussion in a few days when we have him on. So
yeah, don't throw him no easy questions because he got a lot of explaining to do.
They won't be softballs, I promise you that, my friend.
He can't never get any more of my money. I know that. He should have never got in politics. He didn't want to lose his money.
I've had that same thought.
That's what he shouldn't have done.
I've had that same thought.
They don't want to cause problems here in Texas with these Republicans. They run it. They're killing this state as it is.
Well, it says something about his feelings and what he feels passionate about. So he's got a right to do that. But yeah, I agree. There are going to be some people that are maybe going to buy something somewhere else right now because they take that into account when they decide what they're going to buy and where they're going to buy it. John, thanks for calling, my friend. Let's move for a second. And Vlad, I want to tell you going in, we're about to talk to somebody that is one of our flamethrowers here, so stand by. Got your asbestos on. So let's go to Johnny. Johnny, good morning. You've been listening. I'm pretty confident you got a couple of things to say. You're on the air, buddy.
Speaking of flamethrowers, let me ask you.
Yep.
If firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight?
For freedom, my friend. Keep going.
No, they fight. They fight freedom. They don't fight in favor of it. I'm not a flamethrower. I believe in the democratic process.
Yes, you do. And by the way, I was saying that playfully. You're a powerful, powerful advocate with your speech, my friend. We're always glad to have you on. So I want to make sure I was being a little humorous about that. Go ahead. You've got blood. Let's let you guys talk with each other for a second.
Some days I'm feeling horizontal.
Yeah, right.
Some days I feel horizontal. Some days I feel vertical. Today is one of those diagonal days. Nothing that a winning lottery ticket can't cure. Here's my idea. How about, instead of blaming the Democrats for everything, why don't the Republicans wake up to the fact that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, that instead we petition Washington for a national progressive income tax code like we had under Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower. That is the fundamental foundation of a thriving economy. Otherwise, the trickle down will always be not enough money unless you want to have a war or you want to vote yourself in a higher congressional salary. That's the problem here. It's not the principal. It's not the administrators in Harris County. It's got everything to do with money. The money, honey. Show me the money. Otherwise, I'm not interested. You're not going to attract the good teachers. Teachers are quitting because they're being browbeated, they're being threatened, and they're not paid enough where they can't even afford food for their children. That's my bottom line.
Johnny, good one. Let's go wait for a second. I'm going to go to Teresa also for the next question, then back to Blood. Teresa, you are on UTalk. You're on KPFT. I'm Steve Hunter. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective from the point of view of a judge. I was a judge, and we had to realize that since Harris County had wanted backup ballots in case you questioned, it was much simpler before, but if you had a decision made, there was no way to check your work. In this last election, not this last election, but the one before.
Teresa, I'm going to ask you to move a little bit closer to your phone because what you're saying is very important, but it's kind of getting buried in the sounds of probably of traffic. Go ahead.
Well, in this last election, we have new equipment, and every ballot had like 90 items on it. And that took 2 pieces of paper. And when you're printing out the paper, and as a judge, I saw people put the paper in wrong. You would tell them how to put it in, but just it's human nature. People are stressed or they're in a hurry, and there was paper jam. So you had to use a certain sequence to make sure that you printed the second paper, and you have to have, do something to make sure the count is proper. So it makes the election much more complicated. It's not, and if there was just one ballot, it would be easy. But there were 2 pages on the ballot, so you had to print out 2 pages, which made it much more complicated. And sadly, there are people that are just itching to find fault. So this was the first time we did it. I think it'd be nice if it would print on 1 piece of paper. It would make it much less complicated. But I think that people We're trying really, really hard, but this is the first time we really had 2 sheets of paper for these backup ballots. And if people contested an election,
this is just human errors. Right? Teresa, got a question. Some people might listen to that and say, well, but there is something odd that happens here. Most of those mistakes happened in by the way, upscale majority Republican voter precincts. Odd, there weren't a whole lot of those same mistakes happening in the strongly Democrat precincts. So that looks a little bit suspicious, and that's maybe what Matt Brismack and some other people are pointing out, and whether there's validity in that. So what do you say about that?
Well, I disagree with your guess that it's some sort of political thing. I think that I think there were 790 polling places, and there were only 20 that ran out of paper. I think that in polling places where there was heavy attendance, people had to call in. You had to account for all that paper. You had to, call in advance, and when you're processing so many people, it makes it a lot harder. I mean, I was at a polling place on the last couple of days. We only had about 600 people each day, but there were some polling places that were, 1,000 people in a day or more. So that's a challenge when you're going through that paper very fast. You have to sign each piece of paper, or stamp it.
Yep. Teresa, I'm gonna go back to Vlad. For some reason, the signal's fading out for a second. That's really good points. By the way, speaking as I am progressive. I keep referring to myself as a radical moderate, and that's true. But I vote as a progressive Democrat, and I was in a precinct where we ran out of paper. It's a majority Republican precinct. But of course it got handled because there were extraordinarily committed volunteers there, right? The poll workers who were making it all work out, and it did. In fact, the delay in most areas was not very long at all, but it was kind of bad optics, as they say. Teresa, anything else you want to add to that? And I want to go back to Vlad and let him. We're starting to move into the end of time here. And again, Vlad, you're being incredibly generous. Teresa, anything else you want to add?
No, I'm good.
You got it. Yes, you are good.
Discussing this topic.
Thanks for giving us a call, Vlad. Back to you. What's up? How would you? You had a couple of people there to respond to. Any thoughts?
Well, look, what we understand in retrospect, what we saw there, in real time on election day, was numerous polling places running out of paper. We also saw, what's really interesting is we saw lots of strong Democrat precincts open late or failed to open on time because of issues that they had there as well. And given the fact that, we had 60 precincts that ran out of paper on election day, that we had 15% of polling places have issues and turning voters away, is not a nothing burger. And what we see now from the state legislature is actually reasonable, measured, and calculated response to address the problem. What we have from the Senate is a bill that returns elections in Harris County back to the elected officials, so the county clerk, to the tax assessor, just like it has been for decades before the establishment of the elections administrator office, which was done for purely political reasons. What we know is Lena Hidalgo established the election administrator office. It failed spectacularly, both with Isabel Longoria and with the recent one, Mr. Tatum. They both had issues with elections. And what we know is that the voters of Harris County, the residents of Harris County, deserve to have an elected official that they can hold accountable to ensure that the elections are run fairly and freely. And that's exactly what the legislation from the Senate does. And holding Harris County accountable and holding Harris County to the highest standard possible is something that every single resident should do.
Let's go real quickly for another question from Cesar. Cesar, you are on KPFT. You're on UTalk. What's on your mind, my friend?
Well, first off, everyone talks about election integrity, but there's no protection for the workers. And I kind of would like to see some protection for the poll workers, because as of late, they're putting their lives on the line. And then another question is concerning property taxes. And why can't Tesla, Walmart, Buc-ee's, why do they get corporate tax breaks and we have to foot the burden? Couldn't some of the money that we collect in taxes be used for the school improvements, for road improvements, for healthcare, for state infrastructure?
Gotcha. Well, we're not running the state, but of course, maybe we will be at some time. Who knows? Cesar, any other question about that real quickly? I want to go back to Vlad and let him pick that up.
No, sir. I just, those two things are questions we're ignoring when we talk about these issues. And I feel like they need to be brought up because while we're talking about, machines, what about the dedicated men and women who take time out of their lives to make sure that our right to vote happens? In fairness,
they're doing that. A lot of those poll workers are there year after year after year because they are committed to exactly that. And I think everybody pays them an awful lot of respect and an awful lot of tribute. Cesar, thanks. Vlad, back to you. No, thank you. Oops, I didn't mean to cut you off. That's okay, my friend. Vlad, go ahead.
Well, and poll workers and election workers are the unsung heroes of our democracy. You see people who, vast majority of them have stepped up because they felt called to serve. Certainly, they're compensated for their time, not nearly enough. And what we see is a big problem with poll workers is that we're seeing the same people over and over again. And while you look at that and think that's great, we're seeing people who are familiar to us, people that we respect. We're not seeing a lot of turnover. We're not seeing a new generation take up that effort. And so,
interesting point.
The poll workers are getting grayer. They're getting slower because they've been doing it for years. We're not seeing younger people step up to take on that challenge. And so what we need is we need younger people to step up. We need younger people to get involved. And I think that would certainly change the dynamic with regard to how we approach the perspective of poll workers. And I think for a long time, poll workers have been taken for granted. And I think looking at it afresh would change our perspective.
Interesting comment. By the way, that maybe brings up that question, not for right now, that whole question of the weakening of civics education at the elementary and middle school and high school levels. That used to be something, I think, as you're growing up as a kid, you think, wow, that would be something fun to do one of these days. I'll go work at a poll. I'll help people vote. That whole sense of how this whole system works. You got to know that if you're going to show up and help make it work even better. I want to put on Egberto. 2 hours before you and I got started on this morning, Egberto was on the air on KPFT, Politics Run Right. Egberto, you are on the air, my friend. What you want to ask of Vlad?
Thank you for having me. Now, measured discussions are important, especially measured civil discussions are important when we're talking these issues with voters, etc. Unfortunately, measured discussions can give a semblance of truity, or that what someone is saying is really accurate and truthful. What's occurring in Texas right now with the voter rolls, with the way we're modifying our rules to govern just Harris County or things like that should tell the story. If we take a look across the country, this is something that that Republican legislatures are doing all over in order to suppress the votes. This is not up for questioning. We can find problems in every single precinct in this nation where there are issues that come up. As Teresa said earlier, there are a few percentage of places where there were issues in Harris County, but the plethora of issues occurred all over the state. But only Texas was centralized in what the legislature wants to do, and it's because of exactly what our indicted or impeached Attorney General said. He had to make sure that he was measured in the way Harris County was counted. So let's not listen to platitudes whenever we discuss voting, because at this point, you're affecting my rights. Thank you so kindly for giving me the opportunity.
Thanks, my friend. And we get back to that thing. Of course, elections have consequences. Democrats lost some elections, particularly across the whole state level. One of the things we've got to do is make sure, if this is really important, got to be out in those small towns and those other rural areas trying to get the the Democrat vote back up, or at least make sure that Republicans have a sense of fairness in everything they do. Now, we've got somebody here that I think is committed to that. Vlad, you can help close us down here because we're going to end this program in about 2 minutes. You've been, again, incredibly generous. Go ahead, my friend.
Look, I mean, elections in Texas are vital to supporting our constitutional republic, our democracy, and making sure voices are heard. And what we saw happen in Harris County over the last 2 election cycles has been just disastrous. It has led to disenfranchisement for citizens across the county. And in 2022, about a year ago, Harris County Election Administrator Isabel Longora was forced to resign because she took more than 24 hours to tally the votes, and she missed 10,000 votes in the final unofficial count. And it just came up a week later. And then now, during Election Day, we saw hundreds and hundreds, potentially thousands of people turned away from the polling place when 60 polling locations ran out of paper. And so those are real problems. Those are measurable problems. Those are factual problems. They're not political problems, but they're driven by a political environment. And so it's incumbent on the state to ensure that every single citizen's right to vote is secured and that our elections have integrity, and that's what they've done.
Got it. Vlad, I appreciate you taking the time again. By the way, Vlad, is there? Do you have any sort of a blog or anything where you of course you're on the court, my friend. Every day you're out there functioning in this situation. Is there any way people can learn more about you?
No, I don't have a blog right now, but I'm currently just
You're busy.
commenting and working with different media outlets.
Writer, political analyst, commentator, all the things you do. Yeah.
Yes,
all right, my friend. That's it for today. Vlad, thank you so much for joining us today, my friend. You made a big difference, and I got it. You got a clear perspective on this. It's a little bit different than some of our listeners. That's why we play this game. This is UTalk. This is the number you call to hear your voice on the air on KPFT as a listener. And we're going to be doing the same thing tomorrow with a couple of interesting guests. I'm Steve Hunter. This is UTalk. We'll see you back in 23 hours. Please go out, think about the volunteers here, and go make a big difference. Make an amazing day. Thanks for listening.